We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The name of this course is Civil Democracy and the United States Constitution. In it, we will explore democracy and the pillars that support it. The first pillar, the Constitution. The second, 3 arms of government. The third, civil rights. The fourth, civil liberties. The fifth, the freedom of the press. And sixth, institutions. First, let's go over some definitions. Civil, from the Black Law Library. I'm going to always try to give you sources and citations for what I'm talking about, whether it be me verbally saying it or actually just putting it on the video so you can look it up later. So civil in its original sense, this word means pertaining to or appropriate to a member of civitas or free political community, natural or proper to a citizen, also relating to the community or to the policy of government of the citizens, that's us, and the subjects of a state. And just so you know, when we say state, a lot of times Americans or people from the United States, North America, we think it means like, oh, California state, New Jersey state. State in this means the country. State is a country in this definition. In the language of the law, it has various significations. In contradistinction to the barbarous or savage, it indicates a state of society reduced to order and regular government. Thus, we speak of civil life, civil society, civil government, civil liberty. In contradistinction to criminal, it indicates the private rights and remedies of men as members of community. Oftentimes, they're using men rather than people because during this time period, men were people, the rest of us were property. But we'll get into that later. But men just means the public. In contrast to those which are public and relate to the government. Thus, we speak of civil process and criminal process, civil jurisdiction and criminal jurisdiction. It is also used in a contradistinction to military or ecclesiastical, to natural or foreign. That means religious. We speak of a civil station as opposed to military or a religious station, a civil death as opposed to a natural death, a civil war as opposed to a foreign war. Now, let's define democracy. Democracy literally is like the rule by the people. The term is derived from the Greek demokratia, which it was coined from demos, people, and kratos, rule, in the middle of the 5th century BCE, that's before Common Era, and it denotes a political system. It is a form of government that gives people power. That's you and me, gives us power. What does democracy in the United States look like? The United States is a representative democracy. This means that our government is elected by citizens. That's us. Here, citizens vote for their government officials. For example, we would vote for AOC. She's in the House of Representatives. Or here in New Jersey, we would vote for Senator Booker. It's one of our representatives. He's a senator. Andy Kim is one of our senators. These officials represent the citizens' ideas and concerns in government. Constitution is another word that's really important. A constitution is a set of fundamental rules that determine how a country or state is run. Almost all constitutions are codified, which is a fancy way of saying they're written down clearly in a specific document called the Constitution. In the U.S., Constitution is composed of the preamble, which I recited earlier, 7 articles and 27 amendments. The first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights. So today we're going to deviate from the usual way that I have this course. Instead of starting with the Constitution itself, which is really, I don't know, I think it's great to kind of start with it because that's kind of like the guide. But owing to recent events. We're going to start with the three arms of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. So why am I changing it? Because recent events have laid a bare question that strikes at the heart of democracy. What happens when the balance of power tilts away from the people? When the president acts unilaterally, when Congress hesitates to check him or her, or when the courts are thrust into the fray as referees? This is not theoretical. It is a lived tension of our republic. James Madison warned the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny. So let's ask, how do the limits on the executive powers of the legislative branch sustain democracy? So first, we're going to define some more terms, just so we can kind of have a grasp of what is going on and what do each of these branches mean. Executive branch, which is led by the president, it enforces the law. So remember that, it enforces the law. It includes the cabinet, agencies like the EPA, even bodies created by the executive fiat. Say a hypothetical, well, it's not hypothetical now, Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, conjured by presidential order or executive order, not Congress. All right, so that is something that we should understand, that the executive branch enforces the law. The legislative branch, Congress, which is the House and Senate, makes and funds the laws. So you understand that? The legislative makes and funds the law. They control spending and they declare war. Judicial branch, the courts led by the Supreme Court, interprets the law. Okay? So that is something that's really important. So the executive branch enforces the laws. The legislative branch makes and funds the law, and the judicial interprets the law. So keep that in mind when we hear people, the executive branch, saying, I'm going to make this law, I'm going to make that law. Well, that's not exactly how the Constitution was set up. We have a representative democracy, which means power flows from the people to elected officials. But as Madison knew, power unchecked corrupts. The framers were really afraid of tyranny because they just actually were. In 1787, as delegates gathered in Philadelphia, their lodestar was not merely building a government, but restraining it. They had just fought a revolution against a king, and Alexander Hamilton wrote, "Here, sir, the people govern." But how? Madison's Virginia plan demanded a separation of powers. The Virginia plan, presented early on at the convention on May 29th, eventually became the foundation of the Constitution of the United States. The original proposition consisted of 15 resolutions and advocated for a strong central government with three branches, the ones I just described: executive, legislative, and judicial. There are no copies of the original manuscript, so don't go on the internet, DuckDuckGo, in order to find it. But the amended versions from partway through the convention does exist that reflect the incorporation of some of the debates and agreements between the delegates. George Washington presided over the convention and lent this gravitas to the project. Benjamin Franklin, he was like an older dude then. He was the mediator and bridge the divide. And Governor Morris's pen gave us the Constitution's elegant prose, kind of like the editor. Their genius, a system where ambition counteracts ambition. And this is laid forth in the Constitution. But we're going to take a little bit of a detour and go to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1 of the Constitution, because it's really important. We talk a lot about checks and balances in regards to the executive, judicial, and legislative branch. But I think one thing is, even though we have checks and balances, when the people wrote the Constitution, when our founders wrote the Constitution, they didn't mean that every single arm was equal, okay? Congress is the most powerful. Congress is more powerful than all. The legislative is clearly the most powerful of all the arms of government. Even though it has checks and balances on it, it's still the most powerful. Not all of the arms are equal. And we'll get into that later as we explore the Constitution. So again, we're going to go over this article. Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. In its modern understanding, the spending clause of the U.S. Constitution ranks among Congress's most essential, important powers. This clause appears in Article 1, Section 8's list of enumerated legislative powers. It states in relevant part that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, excises, to pay debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. The court has construed the spending clause as legislative authority for federal programs as varied as the consequential Social Security, Medicaid, federal education, Department of Education. The spending power also underlies laws regulating local land use decisions and the treatment of persons institutionalized by states, as well as statutes prohibiting discrimination on certain protected grounds. The spending clause has not always been understood to confer such broad authority. The scope of Congress's spending power divided key members of the founding generations, and these disputes persisted throughout the 19th century. The Supreme Court did not squarely address the substantive powers of Congress' spending power until the 1930s, when it embraced a relatively broad view of Congress' discretion to identify the expenditures that further the general welfare. Congress has used that power to pursue broad policy objectives, including objectives that it could not achieve legislating under its other enumerated powers under the usual framework. Congress offers federal funds in exchange for a recipient's agreement to honor conditions that accompany the funds. This offers and acceptance that the court has said is what lends spending clause legislation its legitimacy. Now, the executive power, what the president can and cannot do, and this is very kind of important. The president's powers are vast, but they are constrained. They are the commander-in-chief and they direct the military, yet only Congress can declare war. The executive orders, which means they can shape policy, but those are reversible by the next president or can be invalidated by the courts. The executive branch does judge cabinet secretaries, but only, they appoint those positions, but only with the Senate approval. But yet, the modern presidency has tested these limits. Take DOGE, an advisory body born of an executive order. Unlike the EPA or the Pentagon, DOGE lacks congressional authorization. It exists because a president willed it. And this is a very gray area right now, innovative or overreach. The legislative checks Congress as the people. Congress is essentially the people's shield. Do you hear that? Congress is the people's shield. So this whole idea that the president is omnipotent and can do whatever he wants, that's not true. And it's in the Constitution. The Congress has tools to constrain the executive, and they're formidable, okay? They are, the purse strings. No executive program survives without funding. Want a wall, a space force, you're going to have to ask Congress. And they're going to have to decide yes or no in regards to funding. Hearings, subpoenas, impeachment. From the Teapot Dome to Watergate to Congress investigates. And so this is something that's really important. Congress has the power to do all these things in regards to the president. So we have power because actually Congress, especially the House of Representatives, the fact that they change every 2 years, that was because it wants to show like these are the people. These are just representatives from the people. So this is why the House of Representatives is amazingly strong. It has amazing powers. If it has amazing powers that's granted to it by the Constitution to support us and to rein in the executive arm of the government. And to kind of go to war, the 1973 Act demands that Congress approves after 60 days of combat a response. And this was a response to Vietnam. But here's the rub. These powers mean nothing if they're not used. When Congress neglects oversight, whether it's out of partisan loyalty or apathy, the scales tip. Let's talk about the war powers and forever wars. The Constitution grants Congress the sole power to declare war. Yet the last formal declaration was Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, all undeclared. Presidents cite authorizations or act as commander-in-chief. But in 2022, when a strike killed an Iranian general, Congress was notified after. Madison warned in 1793, the power to declare war is fully and exclusively vested in the legislature. And so what's the legislature again? Oh, it is the House of Representatives and the Senate. Just kind of reminding you of that. But traditions decay and the legislative muscle atrophies when not flexed. And there are unwritten rules, there are kind of like guidelines, there are norms. So it's like beyond the Constitution. There's always kind of been a gentleman agreement that shaped governance. For decades, presidents have voluntarily released their tax returns. They avoided nepotism. They defer to the Senate's tradition like the blue slip for judicial nominees. So the blue slip, that is essentially saying if we're having a federal judge in your state, we're going to go to the Senate, the senator of that state and ask, their opinion on it. But norms crumble. And when one president discards them, the next one asks, why self-limit? Why do I have to do it if he didn't have to do it? And here, the legislative branch faces a dilemma to codify norms into law or risk their erosion. The emolument clauses lawsuits from 2017 to 2001 exemplify this struggle, using the courts to enforce which was once taken for granted. What are the emoluments clauses and what do they dictate? And this is from Torres Svalitsky from the Brennan Justice Center for Justice. There are actually two provisions in the Constitution, one foreign and one domestic. The latter sets the president's salary and it bars both the federal government and states from giving the president a raise or any kind of bonus. The foreign emoluments clause applies to federal officials, including the president, and it prohibits them from accepting money or gifts from foreign governments unless they receive permission from Congress. Trump, in his first term, it was stated that he violated both the emolument clauses, as he never truly relinquished his business and in fact could withdraw profits from his not so blind trust whenever he pleased. And also, he never asked Congress. This presented an ongoing conflict of interest. For example, the governor of Maine stayed at the Trump International Hotel in D.C. on the Maine taxpayer's dime. This appears to violate the domestic emoluments clause. And then there was the Saudi lobbyist bankrolled by their government who also paid for rooms at the Trump International Hotel, spending almost $500,000, I think $300,000 in 3 months. And that's an explicit breach of the foreign emolument clause. So, we have to be eternally vigilant. In 1787, reframers crafted a machine of gears and counterweights. But machines rust, and democracy is not self-executing. It demands citizens who understand the stakes and legislators who wield their powers boldly and justly, and who remember their oath to the Constitution, not party or person. As we continue this course, ask yourself, what will you do when the guardrails are tested? For in the end, we the people are the ultimate check on the government, because we are the government and we have power. So I should have introduced myself. My name is Lo Sontag, and I am your instructor today.